Welcome back. First we had the unboxing and the exploration of the contents. Now it's time for the review. Blake 7. My name is Paul Mount. Thank you to everybody who looked at my unboxing of the Blake 7 Blu-ray box set a couple of days ago. People do seem to love watching those sort of videos. And thank you especially for all the people who left comments, people who left observations and comments, and a number of people who said they'd be interested to hear a fuller review of the set. And I did say I will be doing a fuller review, which I'm going to do today. It's now Friday morning. I spent most of yesterday watching Blake 7 Series 1, Season 1 on Blu-ray, the new Blu-ray box set that's been released by the BBC. Just a reminder that this came out on Monday. It's priced at $39.99. 6 discs, 13 episodes, remastered, new special effects, new special features, plus special features that were on the previous DVD releases of the series. Now, I've had a chance to look at quite a lot of this now. I've watched 6 of the 13 episodes, and I've watched all the new special features and even inadvertently 1 or 2 of the old ones. And I think my initial observation of what I've seen so far of the set, which is a pretty, I think, wide span of what is on the disc. This is an impressive set. This is an excellent set. This has clearly followed the template, as we mentioned before, of the Doctor Who collection sets, but obviously in slightly smaller packaging. The packaging, as I mentioned in the unboxing video, is more in line with the cheaper priced versions of the Doctor Who sets that come out a couple of years after the original limited edition bigger size box sets. But that's a good thing. I think Blake 7 is a smaller show than Doctor Who, and I don't think it needs that huge lavish treatment. But what we have here is, I'm going to say, the final word on Blake 7 Season 1. This is a terrific set. I'll talk about the episodes first, I think, and then move on to the special features. The episodes have been remastered. They look fantastic. They look sparkling and fresh in that videotape sort of way. They're also augmented, as you know, by new special effects. However, they're also available in the original version, so when you play the discs, there is a little toggle that gives you the option to watch the new special effects. You can go back and watch the episodes as they were broadcast. And I have to say that I think the early episodes of the first series of Blake 7, from memory, had fairly decent model special effects for the time. Bearing in mind, as I mentioned in the unboxing video, this is a series made on the budget of an axed TV series. In fact, it was Softly Task Force and not Z-Cars, which I think I erroneously mentioned in the previous video. Bad, Paul. So it's amazing that the effects were actually quite good for Blake 7. Certainly the early spaceship shots, the establishing shots of the Liberator. Problem arose later on, and I think because of the sheer volume of special effects that were needed, sometimes the production crew were forced to do quite crude 2D animated shots, basically poorly rendered cartoons of the Liberator flying through space, and some poor shots of the pursuit ships, the Federation pursuit ships. For what I've seen in the first 6 episodes, all that's been stripped away. What we have now are new model effects of the London, which is the prison ship lifting off and travelling through space, the appearance of the Liberator, all these other little bits and pieces. I think that they've brushed up the very effective in the episodes themselves shots of the domed city. So there's a lot of retouching and redoing of visual effects, and it's very good. With the caveat that I think the original shots were quite good as they were, and I don't know if I think they've left in some of the original Liberator in space shots because they were very well done, very well lit. And one of the documentary features mentions that on occasion they just let the special effects people get on with doing what they had to do, but some of the model scenes, particularly when they were done in Television Centre, they were poorly lit, so you got quite stark images of the Liberator that didn't accentuate the little nooks and crannies of the impressive Liberator model. So the special effects, the new effects on the episodes I've seen are really very good, excellent, and they've been done in such a way, because they've largely been done with models, they don't have that effect that the ones on the Doctor Who sets do, where they are largely CGI, and CGI in 1970s television is going to be jarring. Here we have new model effects done sympathetically in the style of 1970s television, and Blake 7 in particular, and they look quite good. In fact, they look very good. I will say they look very good. They are obviously new shots, they have a certain slickness to them, and they do look very good. But as I said, the original shots really weren't bad. I remember the shots of the London on its pad launching and flying through space look pretty good. And they've been replaced with new model shots, which also look very good. So what I'm trying to say is, both are decent options, and I think there's been other little changes here, and I think they've tidied up the teleport effect aboard the Liberator. It looks a little more colourful, and those are the things which I did notice particularly. So I would say the model shots are excellent, and if you're worried that they're going to jar and stick out against the episodes, they don't. Again, with a caveat which I'll come to in a moment. They look very good, and they look of the style of the show. They fit very well. So the model stuff is all really good, and I think the effects, there's some new bits and pieces here and there, tidying things up. I think they got rid of bits of fringing around CSO shots, and the effect of the Liberator transporter has been improved. So all that stuff makes the series look slicker. However, what always lets down these sorts of shows when you see them in HD is an unavoidable effect of the studio recorded scenes at Television Centre, because you've got all this stuff in the Liberator, which is this huge set with all this fiberglass and wood and really nicely designed. But because it's a videotape studio recording, it inevitably feels like they're clumping round on wood, and the sets wobble a little bit. The spaceship control panels wobble when people walk amongst them and press buttons, and that's unavoidable. There's not a lot that can be done about that. This stuff was recorded in a hurry on a very low budget in Television Centre in London, and it's not on film. It doesn't have the finesse that productions have now. There's no dubbing over the footsteps. I mean, I always cringe, even on Doctor Who episodes, when people are on alien planets wandering around rocks and then you hear a clumping sound, because the sets are wood and they didn't dub over footsteps, which a film would do. Obviously, they didn't have the time or the production budget to do that sort of thing. So the Liberator comes across as what it is, a set made of wood and fiberglass, and that's unavoidable. You can't do anything about that. And Blake 7 transcends that because the stories are good and the characters are interesting. Going on to the episodes themselves, and talking about the episodes that I've seen, what I think is noticeable, and it's picked up on, I think, in the little production booklet and also in some of these special features. The first 3 episodes are a sort of a serial in itself. It's the establishing 3 episodes which brings the Blake 7 characters together, and that's actually quite similar to what Terry Nation did a couple of years before in his brilliant post-apocalyptic series Survivors, video coming before too long, which spent the first couple of episodes introducing the characters and finally bringing them all together as the core characters that you would follow throughout the series. And he does the same here. The first episode in particular is of a piece. It doesn't really feel like part of the rest of the series because it depicts this oppressive totalitarian regime in the future. Humanity lives in this dome city. We don't know. It doesn't world build to the extent that we know if this is one of many domes or this is where society is hidden after some terrible war. But people are kept oppressed. Their food and drink is poisoned so that they are kept placid and under control. It's a bit like the tripods, where the tripods capped teenagers so that they didn't have thoughts of rebellion. And so it's a similar sort of process here, where humanity is kept under the cosh by this mysterious oppressive regime. And that comes across very well because the sets in the first episode, they're quite stark and futuristic and white. I mean, again, it's all BBC Television Centre stuff, and it's all on video, and it has that clunkiness to it. But the bold whiteness of it's quite drab. And there's very little colour in the first couple of episodes. In fact, it's all very grey and colour drained, because that's the world that these people were living in. And particularly, of course, the first episode is very unlike, even though it's part of 2 other episodes, very unlike any other episode in the series, because it's a very adult scenario of Blake, who's this dissident, this rebel who's had a history of rebelling against the Federation, but that's all been wiped from his mind. He's now placid. He's just a regular worker drone until he's contacted by some other rebels who want to remind him of who he was and bring him back into the fold to create a sort of a figure who will encourage people to rise up against the oppressors. And it's very grey and very heavy to look at in a way, because, as I said, there's no colour, there's no light and shade. It's very much about this one man who's caught in a world he doesn't understand, what's happened to him. And it's very bleak because, of course, as you know, all the rebels that he meets up with are slaughtered. He is framed and sent off to Cygnus Alpha, a prison planet. And he's framed, not just framed for criminal offences, he's framed for child abuse. offences. And bearing in mind this was screened at 7:15 on Monday evenings on the BBC in 1978, that's quite an unusual sort of subject matter to hint at. I mean, there's nothing graphic in it. There's no indications of what he's supposed to have done. And of course, he hasn't done it because these are trumped up charges that have been manufactured to discredit him. But it's fascinating that this was chosen to be an element of the storyline in a time when these sorts of things weren't discussed, whether they should or not, for the sake of victims and so on. But it's an interesting idea that they tried to frame Blake for the most appalling crimes you can imagine. And at the end of the episode, of course, Blake has met up with a couple of his fellow adventurers to come. He meets up with Villa, played by Michael Keating, and Jenna, played by Sally Navette. And they're aboard the London, where in the next episode they try to foment rebellion amongst the prisoners to take over the ship. And at the end of the episode, we come across the Liberator, this huge abandoned space vehicle that becomes the engine of the stories for the next 2 or 3 series. These are great episodes. They're very enjoyable. But again, the issue I have, and that's just me more than anything else, most people will just ignore it, is that sort of studio-bound, cheap feel of it. And that's inevitable. If a show like this was made today, it would be much glossier, much slicker, it would have better sound design. But this is a show made in studios where they were making cop shows and detective shows and soap operas, didn't have the facilities to give this the care and attention it needed to make it something special. So the fact it is something special, with all those production problems, I think is a massive point in its favour. And these are hugely entertaining episodes. It does, after 2 or 3 episodes, become what it is. It's the Robin Hood in space thing that Terry Nation described when he pitched it. And it's very enjoyable, but it drifts much more into, not exactly comic strip, but much more in the traditions of science fiction with alien planets and aliens and space battles. And of course, in episode 6, you get the extraordinary Servalan, played by Jacqueline Pearce, introduced, alongside her vicious henchman, Travis, played by Stephen Greif. And in fact, one thing I've learned from this disc is his name isn't Stephen Greif, which I always thought it was, Stephen Greif. And that's where it does sort of become a bit more goodies and baddies in space, which is not a problem, but it is a bit of a shame that it doesn't retain that grittiness of the first episode or 2. But that's sort of a criticism that I have that you may not share, because you will probably enjoy fantastical storylines, and I do as well. But I just think that it seems like a slightly wasted opportunity to have a gritty, grounded sci-fi show that then becomes a sci-fi show that rubs shoulders with Doctor Who. So that's my brief overview of the first episodes that I've seen. I'll talk briefly now about the special features. Of course, I've watched all them. I went to all them first because I'm fascinated by stuff like that. And this is very well served. In fact, I think this is possibly better served than the recent Doctor Who release, because there are 4 substantial new features and 1 archive feature that's not been seen before. There's a terrific documentary on the first disc called Liberation, which is an origin story. It's about how the series was created. And as I mentioned in my unboxing, one of the problems talking about Blake 7 now on documentaries is that so many of the key cast are no longer alive. However, they've accessed a lot of people that you wouldn't think about. Some of the guest cast. Roger Murray Leach, who is the designer of the show, talks about the difficulties in trying to create these sets with 5p budgets. I was particularly stunned to see very early on, when they talked about the first episode, an actress called Gillian Bailey. She was an early heartthrob of mine back in 1971 when she starred alongside Peter Firth in the classic Here Come the Double Deckers, children's film foundation style musical adventure show which the BBC used to air. She played a character called Billy, and I remember her turning up in the first episode of Blake 7. I think she's now an academic, but to see her on screen in a few shots talking about her work on Blake 7, it's quite nostalgic, because she's somebody that I remember from the 70s, and as I say, she moved away from acting. To see her talking about Blake 7 was fascinating. And there are other guest stars who appeared in various other episodes who are still with us, and a lot of behind-the-scenes people, plus there's some archive material that's used. And it is a terrific 80-odd minute episode look at the origins of Blake 7, and it's terrific. And to be honest, if you were wondering about buying this set, buy it for that alone, because it is absolutely terrific. We also have 2 features with Matthew Sweet, who does lots of in fact he does all the interview features for the Doctor Who sets. I didn't realise there were 2 on this set. I just stumbled across the second one on disc 5, I think it was. But he has done very in-depth interviews with Sally Navette, who played Jenna, and Michael E. Bryant, who directed many of the episodes. And of course, we all know him from Doctor Who stories that he's directed in the past, The Sea Devils, Revenge of the Cybermen, Robots of Death Colony in Space. He did a lot of work on Doctor Who. And these are really interesting features. I think the first one with Sally Yvette's about an hour. She's now obviously in her 70s, but she's still very active, theatre particularly. And she's very much a theatre actor, that's her passion. And she talks about her career, her early days in TV, her incredible life that she led, running a restaurant in London with a partner at the time, and sort of bohemian spirit that I think a lot of actors of the time had. They sort of did lots of different things to earn a living as they learnt their craft on the stage, and that again is something I'll come back to. It's a really interesting interview. She's a no-nonsense character, and it is interesting how she says at the time when she made Blake 7, she was very naive, really, and she didn't like to speak up about the flaws in her character, because Jenna and Callie, played by Jan Chappell, they both were very underwritten as characters, and Terry Nation, I think, admitted later on he was not very good at writing female characters, which is why you have such strong male characters. Although having said that, I think his female characters and survivors were very strong. But the thing with Terry Nation, you never know how much is written by script editors, because he was notorious for handing in scripts that were 6 pages and left it to be padded up by the production crew. And watching some of these episodes, some of the very slick, clever lines of dialogue, you sort of think, I wonder if that's Terry Nation or is that Chris Boucher? I suspect a lot of it is Chris Boucher. I think Terry Nation was very good at a structure and an idea, but not so great at actually filling these things out into scripts. He'd have the idea and leave it to others to sort of make them work as scripts. But anyway, Sally Yvette, yeah, she's very interesting, and it is fascinating to hear her tell her story, how she left Blake 7 because she wanted to improve her education, to went to university to get a degree, and all that and all those life experiences formed her personality and made her have a better view of herself and able to speak up for herself and do the sort of work that she believes in. The second feature is also very interesting. That's about an hour and a half. That's Michael E. Bryant. It's a really deep dive into his career, and it's absolutely fascinating because he's one of the last of the 1970s directors of this sort of TV who's still around. He's retired now, obviously. He spends a lot of time on boats. That's his main passion. But he talks with great honesty and alacrity about working on Doctor Who and Blake 7, other things he did afterwards, projects that fell apart. He made a film, set up a film production company. They did a film called Tangiers, which was disappeared without trace. He ended up for a while working as a long-distance lorry driver because the work wasn't coming his way. Then he started getting back into TV. It's just fascinating, and I love these interviews with people from that age of television, because these days we don't tend to know who directs things on television because it's just names. We don't follow them in the way that perhaps we did back in the 70s and 80s. I think Doctor Who fans are probably different. You know who directs certain episodes. But I think that these directors were jobbing directors who just worked at Television Centre, churning out hours of dramas, probably on low budgets, probably on low pay. But they created pieces of television that will endure and will last forever. And Michael E. Bryant, fascinating bloke. I mean, he's in his 80s now, I think 82, I think he says he is. But his memory is sharp as a tack. And he's very passionate about the work that he did and proud of the work he did. And that's a terrific thing to see. The other new special feature is a short documentary which is a tribute to Stephen Greif, as I said, not Grief, Stephen Greif, who played Travis in the first series of Blake 7. Again, luckily they've had access to archive interview material from him at various stages of his career. He only passed away a couple of years ago, very quickly, and I didn't know how he died. I researched it, I had a look online, and all it says he passed away in the obituaries, but it was very sudden and very quick. Cancer took him within the space of a week, apparently. But his son is there talking about him, some of his working colleagues, his friends, his partner. And it's a very thorough tribute to a great underrated actor, a forgotten actor, who was very passionate about his work and his craft. And he left Blake 7 to do a film, and he felt that the character had become a bit one note. There wasn't much more he could do with it. It's an interesting piece, and it's always interesting to learn about actors whose names you see on credits to old TV shows, but you don't know about their lives. And this tells you about his life and his insecurities and the work he did. And again, he's one of those actors that most people would not have heard of, but people who watched TV in the 70s will remember him from things like Citizen Smith and Blake 7. Those are the sort of big two parts that he will be remembered for. But he did so much more. And it's nice to see documentaries like this that bring that, that remind us of things like that. Also on the set, we have the first part of Kevin John Davis's making of documentary that was made back in the 90s for the original DVD sets. As I mentioned in my unboxing, for contractual reasons, they were never released. But now they're out there. And again, this is very interesting because this was made when all the cast was still alive. And they all look young and they're all talking about the show. And there's lots of information, although a lot of it's repeated because some of the clips have been lifted and used in the Liberation documentary, but that's fine. But there's lots of new stuff. It's nice to hear horse's mouth recollections from people not that long after the event. This was sort of within 12 or so years of the show finishing. And it's fascinating, and I look forward to seeing the rest of this across the rest of the Blu-ray set, which I'm sure will come. We also have some convention footage from the late 90s. This I found very interesting. And again, it's not stuff that I normally watch, but it was interesting to watch this because these were sort of unmoderated. I think Gary Russell hosted the event and just let the actors get on stage and talk. And they sort of field questions from the audience. But what is interesting from both the ones that I've looked at so far, that these are very specific types of actors that you don't get these days. These are actors brought up in the theatre, and their reference points are things like John Galsworthy and Ibsen and plays, theatre works that I think a lot of the audience there who wanted to know what Gareth Thomas's favourite Blake 7 episode was right over their heads. But these are people up there swapping their memories, and there's almost a little sort of one-upmanship occasionally. Oh, we met doing this and I did that. It's very, very lovey-ish. I will use that. I hate that word that people say about actors. They're very lovey-ish. But my God, they come across as lovey-ish here. Even David Jackson, who played the gentle giant Ganon, didn't do a lot on Blake 7. Very erudite and very well-read. And they all are, because they've all worked in the theatre in that particular age when the classics were being mounted in repertory theatres. And as Sally Nivette says in her interview, that doesn't really exist so much these days. The theatre shows are much more focused on being commercial, whereas you had the repertory companies travelling the country doing different productions. And it's fascinating to hear, but they all have that sort of, oh, darling, it was wonderful sort of thing. And I don't mean that in a patronising or damning way, because it's very pleasant. It's very nice. And it's quite heartwarming, because they are all of a generation of actors that are gone. And modern actors, good as many of them are, don't have that history of treading the boards and learning their craft and becoming the actors who then take all that onto TV and then have to balance their stage experiences with working in a different environment. It's fascinating to watch. Really interesting, really enjoyable. And there are other bits and pieces on the set. Obviously, there's an interview with June Hudson, the costume designer. There's a couple of clips from old episodes of Swap Shop with Matt Irving showing Noel Edmonds, who, to be honest, looks quite interested in various models and things. Historical pieces that give it historical context to the episodes in the programme that we're watching. So, from what I've seen, and I've seen half the series and I've watched all the special features, this gets a big thumbs up from me. It's highly recommended. I say it's decently priced. Some people in the comments have said they're waiting for all 4 sets to come out. I wouldn't bother. Just get this and enjoy it now. No matter for you, of course, but I just think this is beautifully put together. And whatever you think about the BBC, they do make sure that fans of their classic shows get product that they really deserve. This is excellent. And I really can't recommend it highly enough. With my provisos about the shows themselves, I mean, Blake 7 is what it is. It's a studio-based drama for the 70s. It falls apart when you try to do action scenes in the studio. There's some fight scenes which are very clumsy in episodes 3 and 4, which tend to involve awkward judo throws and no real contact stuff. And it just comes across as slightly creaky. But that's all in the context of exciting stories led by really interesting characters. And it's fascinating to see the beginnings of that struggle between Blake and Avon that would eventually boil over into the second series. And all the other characters, some get their moments in the sun, some unfortunately don't. But no, it's a really good set, and if you are wavering about buying it, I would say go for it, because this is well worth having. I wouldn't wait for all 4 series to come out. I think they will. I think some people might be waiting because they think that perhaps they'll only do 1 series, but I believe this is selling well. It's in the top of the various retail charts. There's going to be more of these. Excellent. Really enjoyed it, and I'm going to give it 9 out of 10 for Blake 7 Series Collection Volume 1. Right, hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, and you've stumbled across this channel, why not do what a lot of people have been doing? Thank you to all the new subscribers who've come on board since I posted the unboxing video. I do the unboxing videos for Doctor Who related things and Blake 7 related things because I know people are interested. And I also know that a lot of new subscribers come along, and that's great too. But I do them because I enjoy opening these things and looking at them and reviewing them, because that's my sort of era of TV, which is what this channel, as you will probably know, focuses on a lot of retro stuff. So yes, if you're new here, please like and subscribe. Please stick around if you've just subscribed, because there's loads more stuff to come. And it's great to have you on board. Right, I will see you soon with more stuff. Until I do, keep taking the